Welcome back. Now, one thing you may have noticed, if you're really paying attention, is that these tests are fine for now because the Swappy API is fairly fast and we're getting the data back fairly soon. But imagine if we had many of these tests. Imagine if we had APIs that return lots of data that takes a long time to actually get to. You can imagine this growing bigger and bigger until it takes forever for our test to run. I mean, it only took 2.557 seconds, but with more and more tests, with more and more asynchronous tests that we wait to actually get a data response, it's going to take longer and longer. And if we're developers and working and saving our work constantly, if we have to wait a couple of minutes for our tests every time, that's really going to slow us down. How can we improve this so that we're not always doing this fetch call? Well, we can use something called mocks. With a mock, we can fake a function and just pretend to have it running. So that we can use this mock to let us spy on the behavior of a function that is called indirectly by some other code, rather than just testing the output and waiting for the asynchronous code to complete. And you can create mocks in Jest really easily. So let's do that. Let's create a mock here to speed up our asynchronous tests. The first thing we're going to do, let's create more space here. I'm going to, again, create a new test. We'll just call this get people returns count and results. And in here, we'll do the same thing. Second parameter is a function. Now, we're going to create something interesting. We're going to mock this fetch because, first of all, Node Fetch is a third-party library, and if we've really tested out the library code and we checked the GitHub repo and they have tests, we don't need to test that it works. We can assume that the fetch function works as intended. So let's just do a mock fetch and mock fetch, and this is going to be a variable. So let's just say const. We can mock the fetch, and the way we can do that in Jest, again, if you remember, this is something that comes with Jest, mock, spies, and stubs. Otherwise, if you're using something like Mocha, you'd use sign-on. But with Jest, we can just do jest.fn for function. And we can do something called, again, this is all in their documentation, we can do something called mock return value. And we can just return something as if this fetch function was called. So what does a fetch function usually return? Well, we know that it returns a promise, and let's just for now say that it's always going to resolve. So that is a resolved promise. And inside of this resolve, let me make this on a new line just so we can see it better. That's better. In here, man, let's make this a little bit smaller. We want to resolve to an object that is JSON. Because if you remember, we always have to do the .then response.json. So we can just mock this whole thing out. We can say that JSON, so the object that we return, is going to be a promise. So we're going to resolve a promise with the JSON method. And this method, again, is a promise. So again, promise.resolve. And this promise, again, with this part, we're doing this, the .json. And then we get the data. So we can say that within the resolve, we'll have count equals 87. And the results will be, let's just create an array that says 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's save this and get a bit of a syntax error. Let's fix that. We have an unexpected token, and I forgot a comma over here. Classic commas, they always get me. All right, so now we just mocked the fetch call. Instead of calling this get people promise and wait for the data and get the data.count, data.results, we're actually just doing that automatically, assuming that the API works, so we can just test our other parts of the function. Again, because this is still asynchronous, we're returning a promise, remember. We'll want to do a return swappy.get people. Now let's do get people promise. And in here, we can, instead of the fetch, do the mock fetch. We're mocking the function that is fetch. And this is how, when we test, we can use dependency injection to make sure that we're testing different functionality, and you might remember this from integration tests, but without actually using up all these resources. We're trying to be as smart as possible. Now we can have the .then, and we're going to receive the data, just like we did up above over here. Now within here, let's do a few tests. We want to expect the mock fetch. That's right. Because we used jest.fn, we now have an ability to listen in, because in jest, this is also a spy. We can spy on this and see what this function did inside of this function. So what did mock fetch do inside of get people promise? I can say expect mock fetch dot mock. Again, this is in the jest documentation, to have a calls. So how many times has this been called? I'm going to say length. So the number of times it's been called to be 1. Let's save. And this is passing. But remember, with asynchronous tests, we want to always do the expect dot assertions to make sure that they're being called. So in this case, we only have 1. Everything works. If I change this to 0, that fails because we actually did call the mock fetch. This function called the mock fetch once. Very cool. What else can we do? Well, another thing we can do, and let me just copy this. We can expect mock fetch, have another method called to be called with. And we can test to see what this was called with. In our case, it should be called with this URL. So again, let's put it in here. Let's test this out. I'm going to save. Oh, and I actually did make a mistake. We want to do expect, again, the mock fetch to have been called with the URL. Let's save. Oh, and remove the bracket. All right, it's actually passing, but remember, our assertions is now expecting 2 things. So I'm going to save. Do you see how it took a little bit more time this time? Again, because we're repeatedly calling this API, it's taking a little bit more time, this time 3.981 seconds. But with the mock, because we're doing promise.resolve right away, it's a lot faster. And that's passing. If for some reason I change this to, and we expect it to call planets instead, we see that it fails because we expect the get people to actually get the people, not the planets. Very cool. All right, let's do a few more. Well, let's just add, again, copy and pasting in testing is not bad. Let's just copy and paste this and expect that things work the exact same as they did in the above with the regular fetch, but this time with our mock. So we can save, go back, and I have a test failing because now our assertion number is 4. Woohoo! Everything is passing. And if I change this count to 89, and I change this to 89, but let's say to be greater than 10, it should fail because our results only have 6 items. There you go. But if I change this to greater than 5, our tests are passing. Very, very cool. And there you have it. Other than learning a few methods, such as to be greater than or to equal, which you can always check in the documentation when you write a test, everything is pretty simple, right? Once you get the hang of it. We have synchronous tests that are very, very easy, and we just have an expect assertion. And then we have asynchronous tests that we just have to remember to return and make sure that we have access to the promise, whatever it returns. And then we can also, to avoid long-running asynchronous code, such as API calls or maybe even a database call, to mock. And mock functions, also known as spies in Jest, because they let you spy on the behavior of the function, is called by our test, and it's going to spy on what is happening. And you saw that getPeoplePromise actually runs this mock fetch that we created. And all you need is this syntax. And here we just added extra things because we wanted a certain behavior. But even just doing this, we could have seen that mock fetch would have been called with this URL. Jest is an awesome, awesome tool. If you work with other libraries, you'll see a lot of the similarities. Like I said, mocks, stubs, and spies can also be seen in sign-on, especially if you work with Mocha. But overall, the principles are the same. And you can see that tests can be fun because we're just testing logic. And nothing feels better than getting all these green passes. All right, that's it for now. I think it's time for us to get into some React testing and testing our RoboFriends app. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.